The Timekeeper was an attraction that originated at Disneyland Paris in 1992. It combined animatronics and 360-degree film projection to immerse the audience in a time travel story, where your host, the Timekeeper, voiced by Robin Williams, demonstrates his new time machine. The grand unveiling doesn't go exactly to plan, and the Timekeeper sends his assistant Nine-Eye, a circumvisual photo droid, played by Rhea Perlman, on a series of misadventures throughout the centuries. The film is cleverly shot from the point of view of the camera droid Nine-Eye, as she encounters the dangers of dinosaurs, the beauty of Mozart, and takes Jules Verne to a future even beyond his fantastical writings. The attraction would also open in Tokyo and Orlando, but by February 26, 2006, the film and attraction would be closed at all parks. Unfortunately, for those that missed it, it is one of the experiences at Disney parks that no fan footage can do justice to. The immersion of the Circle Vision 360-degree theater just can't be replicated on YouTube. However, director Jeff Blyth will take you behind the scenes today of how they made the impossible possible back in 1992. This is the story of the Timekeeper.
The camera system goes back to the mid-50s. This was an idea that had come up back when Disney was talking about doing the original Disneyland, which would have been 55. They wanted to do a 360-degree film. And the way things were done in those days at Disney was Walt would come up with an idea and just throw it out to his guys. And he had a bunch of very creative guys, and they would basically throw something together. And what they initially did was they came up with 11 16-millimeter cameras mounted in a kind of circular array, a great big platform with 11 cameras pointed out. And this was not particularly sophisticated, and it was 16 millimeter, and it wasn't, very efficient. Somewhere along the line, I'm not sure what the timing on it was, but there was a guy by the name of Ub Iwerks, who was the animator who did Mickey Mouse. When he needed something new, he typically built it himself from scratch. And he came up with the idea for a Circle Vision it actually came to him in a dream. Essentially, every camera and lens has a nodal point, where all of the points of light come together into a theoretical spot, and that's located inside the camera. And if you're doing a 360-degree show, you need to have all these cameras at the exact same nodal point, which means each camera has to be in the same position as all the other cameras, which is physically impossible. And what came to Ub Iwerks in a dream was this idea of folding the optics using a mirror so that you've got the cameras pointed upward into a 45-degree mirror and then out. And if you were to trace the lines of light coming back in through that mirror, they're basically all going to this theoretical nodal point. He just woke up and went, "Oh, I've got it." And there it was. And he went out and built it. And so that was the original camera system. And it was used to just go out and take pretty pictures. There were 9 cameras, 9 lenses, 9 mirrors, 9 film magazines that had to be loaded. All of these cameras were operating off of one motor. And there wasn't even an opportunity in those days to change the focus. And they built in those days, they built a camera car they took an old station wagon and cut a big hole in the roof, and they set the Circle Vision camera in it on a hydraulic lift. And basically they could just, they could be driving down the street and go, oh, here's an interesting shot. And they would turn on the system, and the hydraulics would lift the camera up through the roof of the car to a height so that you couldn't see the car. So you could do travel shots. And so they developed that for America the Beautiful, which was really the first. It wasn't the first Circle Vision movie, but it was the first one that everybody really recognized because it played at Disneyland.
She is a rich land and a rare land, a fresh and fair land, a land so blessed in natural beauty, resources, and people that she became the world's best hope. Come, take a look at her, Americans. Glimpse a nation's splendor and be proud of your heritage.
And that was at a time when, in the mid 50s, you didn't travel, all the way across the country or to exotic locations and things as tourists. And so you could come to see this film, and it could show you America, whether it was the Grand Canyon or, whatever. All of these things were sort of new to a lot of the people that were coming to Disneyland. There was an exotic element of your own country. Now, of course, or just even 20 years after that, people had traveled a lot, and so you needed a much more interesting kind of subject matter. People were going, well, I've been there, I've seen that. So you needed to make the audiences aware of more sophisticated and more interesting, areas, and that was where the China film came from. Was, let's do China in Circle Vision. My first contact with Disney was in 1980 for Wonders of China. That one led to another film that I did for Tokyo Disneyland called The Eternal Sea. Then after that came American Journeys that I did with Rick Harper. That one led to another one. I did a film for Expo 86 that was a film called Portraits of Canada, again, also in Circle Vision. What was happening in these other films is we were developing new technologies, new ways to work with the camera, and bringing to it a much more sophisticated camera that allowed more sophisticated filmmaking. In fact, I remember the instructions I was given when I first started making Circle Vision movies. They just said, go out and shoot in bright sunlight and only work between 10 o'clock in the morning and 2 o'clock in the afternoon, which is, of course, the worst possible light for filming, but this was the limitation. And they did have a way of changing the focus on these lenses, but let me just describe how crazy it was. The lenses would have to be taken out of the camera, and then a small, thin ring of brass was put in, and this brass was, I remember, 1900ths of an inch thick. Slip that in where the lens goes, then they put the lens back on again, and now the focus had been shifted from infinity to 50 feet, and that was it. Those were the options, and you'd have to do all that before you could ever make a shot.
And so, innovation began.
We had to develop an underwater camera system for the show that I did for Tokyo Disneyland. We came up with a number of helicopter mounts. We started changing the lenses to make them actual movie lenses where you could rotate very simply and change the focus in the middle of the shot. In the early days, it was like you had to decide what every camera was focused on in advance before you started filming. And now we were able to make those kinds of changes like you do in a regular movie, changing the focus during the middle of the shot, changing the exposure during the shot. So we were able to take what was a fairly primitive camera and upgrade it significantly over the course of these other Circle Vision movies. You couldn't have gone from, say, the technology of Wonders of China and jumped directly to Timekeeper. That was just, way too big a gap technologically. So there were a lot of things that we were able to bring to that particular show. You couldn't have made Timekeeper with anything less than all of the advances that we had brought to it. Wonders of China, Eternal Sea, American Journeys, Portraits of Canada, the Euro Disney show, but I also did a Circle Vision movie for a Japanese production company as well. And I did one using a different system. It was using the iWorks system for the 360. Did one in Korea as well. So a number of them.
The Timekeeper would be a culmination of all of these technologies.
Hi there. Nice to see ya. The name's Nine Eye, and you caught me packing for my big trip through time. Well, actually, I should say our big trip because you're all coming with me, courtesy of an amazing new invention. The very first, one of a kind, special, limited edition, time machine, Super Sport Turbo XL. Isn't she a beauty? Don't worry, we're not all squeezing into that gizmo, just me. But it'll be just like you're right there with me, because I have built-in cameras all around me, 9 of them, giving a complete 360-degree view of everything I see.
They brought in 2 guys as writers at one point. I think they're technically still considered, they got the credit for it, but their writing was unfortunately not appropriate for Circle Vision. These were 2 guys that worked on the Pirates movie, Pirates of the Caribbean. What had happened was they would come up with these wild notions. Oh, what if we do this? And and it was like, yeah, except that you can't actually put the camera there. They would come up with these wild ideas that just would work for a regular movie, but would not work for Circle Vision. And so while I wasn't specifically, writing, I was controlling where the writing was going, because it was my own experience from all these other films that would say, well, you can't do that, but what about doing it this way? And so I would offer alternatives that would allow us to be able to photograph this stuff in Circle Vision. But one of the technological changes that we had to make to be able to do the Timekeeper was we had some very long dialogue scenes between Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, like 4.5 pages of script, which is very long. And the original cameras were set up with 400-foot loads of film. And that 400 feet would not be long enough to do even one take of this filming. And we were, planning on one of the most elaborate scenes ever with, staging the Paris Exposition of 1900 with hundreds of extras in costumes and so on. And we would have had to be changing the film magazines just constantly. It's a very time-consuming process because you've got 9 cameras that have to be downloaded and then uploaded with new film and prepped, and it's a big deal. And so what we came up with as an innovation for this was we decided that the cameras were going to use 1,000-foot magazines of film. So each time we would have a load that was 9 times 1,000, 9,000 feet of film every time we'd load the camera. But we would be able to get multiple takes on a load of film. And the problem is that when you put 1,000-foot magazine on those cameras, the magazine is so big that it's now in the shot. It's now being seen by the camera. It's big enough that its view is caught by the lenses. So we had to find a way to build a bracket that would extend the magazines and tip them downward. So when people see the Circle Vision rig that we used for the filming of those scenes with the 1,000-foot loads, it looks quite odd because the magazines are tipped away to get them out of the shot. We had also come up with focusing lenses that could be individually, remotely controlled by the camera assistants. For that sequence, we needed to have the arm of Nine Eye in the shot, and that required a remote controlled arm. There was another operator who could, what his arm would do would be what would be translated into Nine Eye's arm. So, we were just layering one technological thing on top of another, and they just became, it was almost impossible. We were right at the edge on that.
The reason I've gathered you here today is to witness the exploration of the next great frontier, courtesy of my own incredible time machine. Patent pending, off avoid repair law.
And then on top of that, that scene we were doing with the 4.5 pages, normally when we would do a circle vision shot, you're limited to about 10 or 12 feet of dolly track, because if you had more dolly track than that, what would happen is you'd get to one end and you'd start to see the track show up in the scene at one end or the other. And so 10 or 12 feet of track was about the maximum that you could do a dolly shot and not see the track. So I wanted to be able to have much more flexibility for, because it was supposed to be Nine Eye, and she's sort of arrived at this location and she needs to sort of approach these guys who are talking and sort of sneak up on them. And so what we came up with for that was to make the entire rig, including me and video taps or recorders and all kinds of things, flying off of a crane. And to use a crane to make that shot, it's picture a building crane like you'd see at a construction site. Normally that would be in the shot. So what we did was we built a fake pavilion, like one of the exhibits from the Paris exposition. We built a 3-sided building that went around the crane so that you couldn't see it from camera. And then that whole thing had to fly up and over this sign and then come down the other side. And then just to make it even more complicated, that one shot was, this is when we capture Jules Verne accidentally. He sees Nine Eye and grabs onto her and wants to come back with her. And so this rig that was hanging from this crane with me and the camera and all this technical stuff also needed to be able to pick up the actor playing Jules Verne, Michel Piccoli. And so underneath the camera was this platform that was attached to everything else so that he could grab on and step onto this, and we could literally lift him up. And, by the end of the shot, he's, 30 feet in the air hanging on. That was about as complicated as it gets. The making of a film for a theme park follows its own track, in terms of pre-production, production, and post-production, and then coordinating with wherever it's going to show in a theme park. That track is separate from the building of the park. One of the problems we had was that there would be a Nine Eye in the theater. The interior theater animatronic figures, they were on their own production schedule, separate from ours. Then there were the people who were building the theater, and they were on their own production track. And where the problem lay was that we were tasked with showing parts of Nine Eye, her arm. At the end of the film, Jules Verne, hands her a rose, and she has to reach out and take the rose. So that arm had to be designed, had to be built to match whatever the planning was for the Nine Eye that was going to be in the theater. And they were on a different schedule. And so the film was being done earlier and was forcing design decisions on them. I mean, it wasn't the best way to go, but basically we were saying, sorry, we need to shoot this scene. What does her arm look like? And so they'd sort of advance the design of it and figure it out. And then they'd build this arm, this large arm that could be manipulated with the camera to look like her arm. But where it got even more complicated was when we did the Mozart scene, because what had happened is we were scouting locations, we were making prep for filming this idea of showing up, in France when Mozart was presenting to Louis XIV or whatever it was. we had found this great location, and we were already casting people. We're making these plans. At some point, I got called to a meeting back at the studio with Michael Eisner. And it wasn't just the two of us. It was like there were 100 people there, because he was doing one of these regular meetings where it would be like one after another. You would come in and tell him where you were in the production, what was going on, what was happening. Michael would just sort of go along and go, oh, that sounds great, or work on this, or whatever. And he'd throw out ideas, or was just fascinated by what everybody was working on. So it was a big sort of production review. And this was happening in the middle of us, preparing to do this Mozart scene. And Michael just out of the blue said, oh, wouldn't it be cool if she goes past a mirror and sees herself? I'm standing there with literally 100 people there, and they're all waiting for their turn to talk about whatever. And I knew that we had kind of broached this idea at one point, because the place we were filming was filled with mirrors. And so it was like, how do we avoid seeing the camera, which looks nothing like Nine-Eye? How do we do that? So we just had to avoid the mirrors. We take mirrors out, or angle a mirror so that it wouldn't show our reflection. But in that particular moment, right there in front of Michael Eisner, he said, it wouldn't be cool. And I said, yeah, okay, let's do that. Well, I had no idea at that moment how we were going to do it. Not a clue. But it was like, I walked away from the meeting, and it was like, how are we going to do this? Whether it was, just put a green screen in where the mirror was and figure it out digitally later. And so we came up with a very old school approach, and that was to have a fake mirror. It's really a window, and beyond the mirror is a duplicate hallway, and it's designed to photographically match the hallway that we're in. And then what we needed to have was a model of Nine-Eye on a dolly that could match our dolly move, so that when we went past the window that looks like a mirror, she would be there, and it would look like she was seeing herself. Easy enough to describe, very, very difficult to do. And this goes back to that whole business of the scheduling. They hadn't built Nine-Eye yet, or they had been in the early design stages. And all of a sudden, I needed a complete Nine-Eye. I needed something that would pass for the real Nine-Eye. And I needed her physically there on the stage where we were, on the set where we were filming. We were doing it at a place called Chantilly. So the design team for Nine-Eye had to advance what their schedule was so that they could get her ready in time. And they shipped us a dummy Nine-Eye that was close enough to what the real one was going to be like. Every scene was an enormous challenge. Every one of these things was incredibly complex. Filming underwater with lots of extras, with a submarine, with Jules Verne in the submarine, and I'm directing him by writing notes on a pad and holding it up to the glass for him. Well, I nearly died when we were underwater there. We were in the Bahamas. We had this guy who was our underwater coordinator. He had worked on a number of the James Bond movies. So he knew all these great locations. And I went there on the survey, and I was diving with him, and we were looking at all these things. And he showed me this shipwreck. And it was this old ship that had sunk in about 60 feet of water. And I said, oh, this looks like it'd be a good location. So we decided we were going to bring this submarine and just, oh God, all of the logistics to get that thing in the water with Jules Verne in it, in makeup and wardrobe and everything. That was a headache. But we had to put the camera down on top of this shipwreck, on the deck of the shipwreck. we had a crew of, I don't know, maybe 30 divers. We are bringing this thing in on a crane, and the crane is on a barge. And the barge has to come in and lower the camera down. The camera in that thing was probably, close to a ton. And it had to be lowered very slowly down to 60 feet. And I'm down there at the bottom on the deck of the ship. I'm watching this craziness of all these divers swarming around as this camera is being lowered by the crane down in the water. And it's like, where do you want it? And I'm, just like guiding in the Concorde, I'm standing there waving and saying, bring it right here where I'm standing. This is where I want them to set the camera down. This thing is, is massive. The underwater housing is huge. And so this thing is coming down, and these guys are all swarming around it, trying to steer it, move it, guide it, to set it where I want it. At some point, somebody swam behind me and accidentally hit the hose that was for my regulator and pulled it right out. And this is when the camera is like inches off the deck of the ship. Everybody's swarming around, and somebody knocks my hose out. And so air is going straight up. I've got a regulator in my mouth that's just sucking seawater. I panicked. I've been diving for a number of years, but it was like, I've got nothing. And there was some diver that was right near me, a number of them. I gave them the sign, which is, for no air, which is a kind of a cutting throat signal. They're looking at me, and I'm giving them this frantic signal that I've got no air, and they think I'm signaling, yeah, this is the spot for the camera. And so they're going, yeah, that's great. Okay, good. We'll set it down. And I'm going, no, you don't understand. I'm sucking seawater. Finally, this guy comes up to me, and I could see it in his eyes. He's just looking at me like, there's something wrong here. I grabbed for his mouthpiece, and he sort of realized what it was, and he took it out and he shoved it in my mouth. And by this time, I'm just dying. I'm coughing. I'm spitting up seawater. I'm trying to grab some air, but of course, what's happened here is, if you're going to buddy breathe in underwater, you normally know that that's coming. So you can take a big breath and say, okay, I'll take a breath, and now I'll hold this. Now you take a breath while I hold it, and then, back and forth. But the two of us were doing this, and it was just like instantly. So neither of us had taken a breath. And so it was pretty frantic. And I thought, this was going to be my last little moment. But we went back and forth several times. Meanwhile, somebody realizes they can see my hose is blasting, air straight up, and hooked me back up again. And I was, able to breathe on my own tank after that. But that was nuts. One more little challenge. It gets worse. I'm down there at 60 feet or so, and they've now settled the camera down. I've now got, my air is now working, and this crew is all streaming back up to the surface to do whatever is going to come next. And somebody writes me a note on the little grease pencil pad, said, "You stay here. We'll be right back." I can still feel the salt water in my throat. And they left me. I'm there all by myself with the camera. I don't understand what's happening. And so I'm just waiting and waiting. And after about 10, 15 minutes, they come back and they bring me a new tank with more air. It was like, okay, this is not in the book, the book on diving. Somebody brings you another tank. There's all kinds of things that you need to do, decompression tables and all sorts of experiences that you're supposed to do, but not when somebody brings you another tank. It's like, okay, we're off book now. So when we were done and I needed to go back, I finally come back up to the surface and I'm exhausted. This was just physically one of the most exhausting things I'd ever done. And the boat that we had stepped off of when we were getting into the water to do this was a really nice big boat with a special deck on the back that was just designed for divers. And when I come back up, that boat has gone. And there's what looks like a rowboat, and it's a good couple of 100 yards away, and I have to swim to it. Well, I'm just physically exhausted. I have to swim through a bunch of little jellyfish that are between me and the boat. I finally make it over to the boat, and they haul me into the boat over the side of the boat, and I threw up all over everybody. And it was just physically I was drained.
Now, please form double rows and move to the center of the theater. Do it! You've been waiting outside. You've been in line for a while. Just do it! Thank you.
It was always thought that he was going to be doing this. There was no question. Obviously, we built the AA figure to look like Robin Williams. So there was, it's not like, we cast him at the last minute and had to make a change. It was like, no, we always knew he would do that. But we didn't bring him in until we had the film pretty much finished. Robin Williams is gracious enough to say, yeah, I'm going to do the part, but he's only going to be available for, a short window. And so you have to make the most of what you're going to do with him. And so what happened on this occasion was we were going to show the film to Robin at a facility that we have in the San Fernando Valley. We called it the Tahunga facility. And it was just a big, warehouse. And we didn't have a 360-degree view. We had 5 screens. So it was a 200-degree view of the show. And we had a platform with 5 projectors that were sitting there. And so they could screen the front 5 screens for Robin. And this was how we would screen our footage. I'd make a new cut of the film with the editors. We'd bring it to the Tahunga facility and we would run it on the big screen, and we could see any issues that you might not see when you're editing. The problem with that facility is the projectors are just out in the open, and 5 projectors is quite noisy, and the place is not soundproofed. It's quite a noisy facility, and we don't care about any of that when we're looking at dailies. But I wanted to record Robin and get his immediate reaction to the film, because I said he can only see it for the first time once. And he'll see it several times, but there's only one time that it's going to surprise him. And I want to record that. And so I got all this grief from the technical people at, Walt Disney Imagineering. They would say, oh, you can't do that. It's going to be noisy. The projectors will be there, and there's going to be, a crowd of 50 or 60 people that you can't have Robin Williams show up at the studio and not draw a crowd. I said, that's fine. I understand all of those things, and I don't care. I want a microphone on Robin Williams. And they said, well, we're going to record him after. You can take him to a nice recording studio on the set, on the lot. You can record all this stuff again, no problem. And I said, that's fine. I understand that, but it won't be the same as the first time he sees it. And so it was like, okay, how do we do this? And I said, well, I just put a wireless microphone on him so he's not encumbered by it in any way. And we'll just show the film. We'll roll it for him and let him react. Let him be Robin Williams. They dragged their feet on it. I will not forgive them for this, but what they ended up, I just said, just bring a microphone. And they brought this microphone for him that was what's called an old lavalier mic. I mean, this thing dated from about 1960. It was one of those things that you hang around your neck. I mean, this was like one of the oldest microphones at the studio. And I gave him the evil eye when they did this to me in front of Robin Williams, but it was like, hey, yeah, it's for a microphone. You're getting a microphone. So we run the film. You know, my directions to Robin was, I just said, hey, you're going to see this for the first time, just like, you know, Timekeeper sees it for the first time. And, you know, feel free, react. Just give us your impressions.
Oh, quick joke for you. How many Neanderthals did take to light a fire? None! They don't have it. 12,000 years ago, the last great ice age. Fabulous. 1450, a demonstration of Gutenberg's printing press. Wie geht's? We are not in Germany. Unless there's a whole new fashion thing. Look at those skirts. It must be cold. And no one's wearing underwear. My machine works. I get the grant. Quick, follow that Mona Lisa. Yes, it's Amadeus himself. Today's his 7th birthday. He's playing his own minuet in G. Isn't it fabulous? And over there's little Louis XVI with his head still on.
So he did. And of course he went nuts. And he, you know, was just throwing stuff. I was like, oh my God, you know, he's just reacting. It was all great, good stuff. But of course it was noisy. I tried to keep the crowd back and to a minimum. But, you know, there are people laughing and there are the projectors running in the background. So we did all that, got some good stuff, and then we went to a studio and recorded what everybody at Imagineering was going to call the real audio, the good audio. So we go back into the studio and we'd had lunch, and now Robin, it's just Robin and me in the studio, and we're running now just a single screen because we can't put 5 screens in the studio. And so it was sort of like, well, you remember this scene, and oh, this is where the race car does this, or this is where he's underwater, or this is, the bobsled. And so it was a very different experience. He, it was like, oh yeah, I remember, or I'd have to kind of remind him, and it was like trying to reconstruct with good microphones and good audio quality what it was that he did the first time. Well, here's what the end result of this was. We used a lot of that. It was good quality audio, but we also ended up using a lot of that first recording in the film. And here was my argument. When you see the film in an audience, in the theater, people are laughing. So what if there's a little bit of laughter that's leaked into his audio? It just fits in with the other part of the experience. And the same thing with the projectors. You're in a theater where there are 9 projectors now. The sound of the projectors is still buzzing away in the background. So again, who cares? So we went for what was the best performance, and a lot of that performance came from that initial recording.
Despite all the many complications, overly large sabotage microphones, and a near-death experience, one of the first screenings of The Timekeeper made it all worth it.
By the time you get to the first real screenings at the opening, that's pretty special. And I remember one particular screening. It was at the opening of Euro Disneyland, and I had been sitting outside the theater. There were a number of VIP guests. The doors open, and out comes this old guy. He's doddering along, and he's talking to some young French hostess who had been assigned to him to, give him this VIP tour. And he's just full of these questions, and he's going, well, what about this, and how did they do that, and what about this scene and that scene? And she's going, I'm sorry, I really can't answer your questions. And I overhear all of this, and so I said, excuse me, maybe I can answer some questions for you. I directed the film. And he went, oh my God. He says, the scene of the Paris Eiffel Tower going up. He says, did you do that in reverse? And what were you doing for the sky? Was that, was that blue screen? Was that green screen? Or, I'm going, wow, this guy knows those special effects. Well, I sat and talked to this guy for, good 20 minutes. I gave him all these answers. And he says, "Oh, thank you. This has been so great. I really appreciate, your knowledge on this." And he says, and so what was your name? So I gave him my name, and I said, and what was your name, sir? And he goes, Ray Harryhausen. I nearly fell over dead. I couldn't believe it. I mean, just Ray Harryhausen is there, asking me all these questions about special effects in my film. That was a highlight.